Hey, good morning, Foothill. It's kind of my sermon prep day. I haven't been in the office in 3 months, so I thought I would come in and just get my studying done. This is normally my sermon prep day. It's Wednesday, the 10th, and I just wanted to send this to you and just kind of remind ourselves of really some basic truths today. The book of Micah, which is probably not a book, it should be a book that we all read, but it's a fairly short book. You could read it sitting down in 15 minutes, probably 10 minutes if you're a faster reader. Is a book where God is coming in judgment and warning the people, and in spite of him saying, "Here's I've been so good to you, and I've delivered you, and I've walked with you, and all that, and yet you've forsaken me." And at one point he talks about how you oppress the poor, you stand up for injustice rather than justice, and by the time you get to chapter six, God is basically saying, "Man, what have I done? What have I've only been good to you, and this has been your response." And then it sort of switches to the voice of the people in a pretty well known passage, Micah chapter 6, starting in verse 6, where the prophet writes, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high?" He's saying, okay, so now that we've transgressed, we've sinned, there's this barrier. How do I come again before the Lord? He says, "Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with the calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" In other words, is the way of reconciliation with God when I've sinned against Him, or when I've in the current climate, I've not stood up for righteousness. I've been silent, or I've stood on the side of the oppressor, or whatever, and haven't lent my voice to that. Then how do I approach God again? Is it through, man? I tell you what I'll do. I'll just sacrifice everything. I'm just going to give a bunch of money, or I'm gonna read my Bible front to back, whatever it is. This sort of massive, extravagant sort of giving to the Lord. Will that make up for the way that I have not acted righteously? And the Lord ends it by saying this: He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. There it is. That's our obligation before God, right? He's not saying we work our way into God's good graces, but he's saying, here's what it is. God isn't asking that we, go and empty our bank accounts. Well, sometimes he might do that for some, but in general, that doesn't make up for a life where we have not done justice, where we have not showed kindness, we have not loved doing kind things for those who are in need, where we have not walked humbly with our God. What does correct that? That we do justice. We are on the side of justice. That we love kindness. Right? We are looking for active ways to be kind to people, and we walk humbly. And we recognize who we are. That unless God's grace had abounded to us, right, we would never earn our salvation. We would never earn God's grace upon us. So let me just encourage you today that God is showing us what he requires of us in days like this. And it's just sort of recalibrating to that true north. That is, that if Jesus has changed us, if Jesus has saved us, it's like the Israel of old, if he has set us free and walked us out of the sin of Egypt, we might say, and all those pictures we have of salvation, then one of the things he says, then one of the impulses of our heart ought to be to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly. Man, if that doesn't describe you today, then there's a way back, right? There's a way back, and that's simply that we would repent, that we'd fall on our knees before God and say, God, I've transgressed this, and so help me. I want to walk humbly before you. I love you guys. I hope you have a good rest of your Wednesday, and we'll talk again on Friday. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.